The $15 billion plea. July 2024. A private plane touches down in El Paso, Texas. Inside sits a 76-year-old man in a cowboy hat and worn boots, betrayed by the sons of his former partner, El Chapo Guzmán. Within hours, Ismael El Mayo Zambada faces U.S. federal court. The charges? Decades of drug trafficking. The forfeiture agreement? A staggering $15 billion. That's billion with a B, more than the GDP of entire nations. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Investigators believe that's only half of what he actually controls. While El Chapo dominated headlines with tunnel escapes and Netflix series, El Mayo quietly built the largest criminal fortune in Mexican history, hiding behind milk cartons, cattle ranches, and children's daycare centers. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the invisible billionaire who outsmarted everyone for over 5 decades. How did a poor farm boy from Sinaloa amass a fortune that might exceed Pablo Escobar's? Where did he hide his billions? And what happens to that empire now that the ghost has finally fallen? The rancher who became a kingpin. Ismael Zambada Garcia wasn't born into luxury. He was born into survival. In the late 1940s, in a small ranching village in Sinaloa, Mexico, young Mayo grew up in a poor farming family where every day meant backbreaking labor in the fields. While other drug lords' origin stories involve urban poverty or criminal families, Mayo's beginnings were distinctly rural. He learned to work cattle, understand the land, and most importantly, stay patient. Sinaloa wasn't just farming country. It was also the birthplace of Mexico's narcotics pipeline. Young men who wanted to escape poverty faced limited options, and Mayo chose the drug trade. But unlike the flashy criminals who would come after him, Mayo learned something crucial early on. Invisibility equals survival. Starting with small smuggling jobs, Mayo studied the business from the ground up, learning secret mountain trails, understanding who to bribe, who to trust, and who to avoid. By the 1980s, he had risen through the ranks to become a serious player. When the 1990s arrived, Mayo was already a boss in the Sinaloa Cartel. And though Joaquin El Chapo Guzmán became the household name with daring prison escapes and mainstream media coverage, Mayo was quietly co-leading the entire operation. Here's what most people don't understand. Mayo was actually a cartel boss before he gradually elevated El Chapo to power. They eventually became co-leaders, but Mayo always maintained his cardinal rule: stay invisible to survive. No interviews, no photographs, no public statements. While Chapo soaked up the spotlight, Mayo operated from the shadows, and that strategy worked flawlessly for decades. He became a phantom, rising to the very top of Mexico's drug hierarchy without ever becoming a celebrity criminal. The billion-dollar machine. Let's talk numbers, because this is where Mayo's story becomes almost incomprehensible. Running one of the world's largest cartels meant Mayo wasn't dealing in millions. He was operating in billions annually. Depending on the year and which profits are counted, reports estimate the Sinaloa Cartel's annual revenue ranged anywhere from $3 billion to nearly $40 billion. Over decades of trafficking, those yearly billion-dollar sums compounded into a fortune that few can fully trace. The operation required massive infrastructure, fleets of planes and boats, warehouses, safe houses, sophisticated smuggling routes, and an army of smugglers, accountants, lawyers, and enforcers to keep the entire system running smoothly. And all of that required constant payoffs to officials and police, a cost practically built into the business model. So where did all that money go? Some equipped cartel operations, buying planes, boats, weapons, and paying the workforce. But here's where Mayo differed radically from criminals like Pablo Escobar or even El Chapo. He didn't splurge on ostentatious luxuries. No hippos and private zoos, no gold-plated guns, no massive palaces designed to flaunt wealth. Instead, Mayo quietly funneled billions into legitimate-looking businesses, creating a portfolio that would make him appear to be nothing more than a successful rancher and businessman contributing to the local economy. The Milk Cartel, hiding billions in plain sight. According to investigative journalist Annabel Hernandez's book, El Traidor, Zambada established his first legal front company as early as 1988, right at the height of his drug career. It was a dairy and cattle company called Nueva Industria de Lácteos de Culiacán, essentially a milk production business. Through this company, he started producing pasteurized milk and cheese under the brand Leche Santa Monica, which became a household name in Sinaloa during the 1990s. The dairy's products were widely recognized for their quality, and at one point, they were even exported to the United States. Think about that for a moment. While being one of Mexico's most wanted fugitives, Mayo was also supplying everyday milk cartons to families. Local parents poured Santa Monica milk on their children's cereal every morning, never suspecting that behind the label was the most powerful drug trafficker in Mexico. But the dairy was just the beginning. U.S. Treasury officials eventually unraveled an entire network of front companies tied to Mayo's family and associates. One of the most significant was Establo, Puerto Rico, a sprawling 760-hectare ranch in Culiacan that Mayo controlled. This property featured hundreds of cattle, poultry farms, and something particularly interesting, its own private airstrip hidden on the property. On paper, it was a productive farm. In reality, that airstrip served as a key smuggling hub, with small planes loaded with contraband landing there regularly. The property was so critical that when authorities seized it in 2000, it was eventually returned to the Zambada family, evidence of just how much power and influence Mayo had woven into local institutions. Mayo's portfolio expanded far beyond agriculture. He established Llamaro Constructora, a construction company taking on civil engineering projects and real estate developments, an ideal front for laundering drug money under the guise of building homes and roads. He created Multiservicios Jevis, a vague multi-services firm offering various business services. As one DEA administrator bluntly stated, these weren't legitimate businesses, they were illegal cash cows fueling the drug trade. But perhaps the most bizarre elements of Mayo's empire were yet to come: the daycare and the water park. In 2001, Mayo's family opened something absolutely surreal, Estancia Infantil Niño Feliz, which translates to Happy Child Daycare. On paper, the registered partners included Zambada himself, his wife Rosario, and one of his daughters. It provided daycare and preschool education in Culiacan, operating exactly like any normal childcare center. Parents dropped off their kids for finger painting and story time, never suspecting the daycare was bankrolled by one of Mexico's biggest drug lords. The center ran normally until 2007, when the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control blacklisted it as part of Zambada's money laundering network. Incredibly, even after being exposed, the daycare reportedly continued functioning in Mexico for years. But Mayo's empire didn't stop there. His network included a company selling frozen foods, a trucking firm to move goods and mask money transfers, and even, yes, you heard this correctly, a water park. The Zambada family owned Los Cascabeles Aquatic Park, complete with pools and winding water slides. In 2013, U.S. officials identified the park as yet another money laundering asset within Mayo's empire. Despite being sanctioned, the park kept operating openly, still welcoming families for weekend fun and even advertising on social media. It's almost comedic, cartel money being scrubbed clean through everything from milk and cows to playgrounds and splash pools. All these businesses served dual purposes. They made Zambada's drug money look legitimate, and they cemented his power locally by investing in his home state's economy and winning favor among residents. The Phantom's fortune: how rich was El Mayo? So the big question: how rich is Ismael El Mayo Zambada? When Mayo finally faced U.S. justice in 2024, he agreed to forfeit $15 billion. Let that sink in for a moment. $15 billion is more than the GDP of some small nations. Even U.S. prosecutors called that number stratospheric. But remember, that was just what investigators could actually trace through decades of financial detective work. Over nearly 6 decades in the drug trade, analysts estimate the Sinaloa Cartel under Zambada's leadership generated hundreds of billions of dollars in total revenue. Some analysts place Mayo's personal fortune in the $40 to $60 billion range, though only a fraction ever showed up in official court documents. For comparison, Colombian kingpin Pablo Escobar was estimated to be worth around $30 billion at his peak. Mayo's known $15 billion forfeiture and the cartel's total earnings likely far beyond that arguably make him one of the wealthiest criminals in history. If those higher estimates are accurate, Mayo would rank as the second richest person in Mexico, just behind telecommunications mogul Carlos Slim with his $100 billion fortune. But unlike Escobar, who flaunted his wealth with a giant estate called Hacienda Nápoles, complete with a private zoo and luxury vehicles, Zambada kept his money meticulously hidden. Most of it was tied up in farms, ranches, businesses, real estate, hidden cash stashes, and probably countless secret bank accounts scattered across multiple jurisdictions. U.S. agents spent years playing cat and mouse, trying to hunt down his assets, and experts believe much of his wealth may never be found. It was simply too well concealed across too many layers. The betrayal and the fall. even ghosts can't run forever. In July 2024, after more than 50 years of evading capture, Mayo's greatest weapon, his invisibility, finally failed him, but not because of law enforcement brilliance or high-tech surveillance. Reports indicate he was betrayed by none other than El Chapo's sons, known as Los Chapitos, who allegedly kidnapped him and handed him over to US authorities in exchange for benefits in their own cases. Think about the irony. After decades of outsmarting the DEA, CIA, Mexican military, and every law enforcement agency on 2 continents, Mayo was taken down by the very organization he helped build, betrayed by the next generation he had mentored. Today, Mayo sits in MDC Brooklyn, one of America's toughest federal detention centers, awaiting trial alongside an eclectic mix of high-profile inmates. For a man who built an empire out of invisibility, it's a surreal ending. No ranches, no airstrips, no water parks, just concrete walls and iron bars. His cartel empire, once seamlessly united under his quiet leadership, has fractured into violent factions fighting for control. The streets of Sinaloa have erupted into warfare as different groups battle over the vacuum Mayo's arrest created. What happens to the billions? Here's where things get fascinating from a financial perspective. The US government has frozen over $15 billion in identifiable assets, but that forfeiture process could take years to complete, involving complex international legal battles. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, hidden among ranches, shell companies, and legitimate businesses, the rest of Mayo's empire quietly continues generating revenue. His dairy products still sit on store shelves. His construction projects still operate. His water park still welcomes families on weekends. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Mayo was so successful at blending his criminal empire with legitimate business that untangling them may prove impossible. Unlike Escobar's obvious palaces or El Chapo's flashy lifestyle, Mayo's wealth is woven into the fabric of everyday economic life in Sinaloa. That milk brand people trust, cartel money, that popular water park where kids celebrate birthdays, built on drug profits, the construction company that employs hundreds, a laundering front. US investigators face a monumental challenge. How do you seize assets that look entirely legitimate on paper? How do you shut down businesses that employ real people and serve real communities? Mayo's greatest triumph wasn't just evading capture for 5 decades. It was building a financial empire so deeply integrated into legitimate commerce that destroying it would harm innocent people and local economies. His legacy persists not in headlines or folklore, but in every transaction his businesses conduct, every paycheck his companies distribute, every product his brands sell. The invisible billionaire may be behind bars, but his ghost still moves through the economy he built, untouchable even in defeat. The ghost who ruled from shadows. In the end, Ismael El Mayo Zambada's story reveals something profound about power. The loudest criminals don't always win. Escobar's flamboyance made him a legend, but also made him a target. El Chapo's daring escapes made him famous, but ultimately led to life imprisonment. Mayo's invisibility made him a phantom, harder to see, harder to catch, and far wealthier than either of his more famous counterparts. For over 50 years, he proved you don't need gold chains, exotic animals, or magazine covers to rule an empire. You just need patience, intelligence, and the discipline to stay hidden. He outlived Escobar. He outlasted El Chapo. He out-earned almost every criminal in history, and he did it not from palaces, but from the shadows, dressed in worn boots and a ranch hat, looking like any other farmer while controlling billions. Even now locked in a Brooklyn detention center, Mayo's legacy lingers in every glass of Santa Monica milk, every child playing at his water park, every building his construction company erected. The invisible billionaire finally fell, but the empire he built, hidden in plain sight, may prove immortal.